Meaghan, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the work that you're doing at HubSpot, and people have had a chance to hear a little bit about you in the intro. But because this is still a relatively new role at HubSpot, I'd love for you to kind of, in your own words, tell people what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I've been in this role for about a year, so it's still pretty new to me, but also pretty new to HubSpot. I'm the first person to take on this role. And so, in terms of the work I'm doing, it's a lot of, I would say, sort of zoomed out, high scope global work of thinking about how do you enable remote work and create some policies around remote work, create some consistency around remote work within the company of HubSpot. But then, how do you also zoom in and coach individuals on how to do their best work while remote or how to manage a hybrid team? So it's definitely a multifaceted role in that sense, but keeps me on my toes. I'm learning a ton, and it's a great environment to do it in at HubSpot.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about your situation is that you have just so many resources at your disposal to really do it well. But at the same time, there's no playbook, right? This is really new frontier. So how do you go about prioritizing maybe what to tackle first and what's most important in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we first started with when I entered this role was just asking everybody who was already remote. We had a population of around 150. And so we first wanted to understand, like, what are the biggest pain points that we can solve for? So from that, the big things that we learned were consistency, right? Just understanding when I go remote in my company, what does that really mean, right? Where can I go? How do I do it? What does that mean for my career growth? So sort of creating some consistency around those processes. And with that, what we sought to do at first was just to understand, division by division, role by role, there's going to be some flexibility, even region by region. But how can we create some guardrails so that when you're thinking about going remote, you likely already have a lot on your mind. Perhaps you're moving, perhaps something else is going on in your life. But how can we create a playbook where you know exactly who to talk to, exactly what HubSpot will provide to you, what steps you need to take, how long it takes, and what it will mean for you once you go remote? So creating that kind of consistency and expectations and process was one of the first things we prioritized. And I think that's allowed us to then, add on layers of how do we then make it unique to each role? How do we then sort of flex as needed?
That's a really great approach. I mean, you're effectively doing user research on your own in your own company. It's a great way
Exactly.
to approach it.
Yeah.
So I've heard you say in the past that having remote workers is business critical for HubSpot. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? Just elaborate on why it's so crucial to the growth of the company.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of reasons. So, for one, obviously, most of our locations, we're in busy cities, right? Boston, for example, where we're headquartered, or Cambridge, it's a small place. There's a lot of talent here, but there's also a lot of competition. And so, with remote work, by expanding our pipeline across the United States and in different countries throughout the globe, we have access to so much more incredible talent that we would not otherwise have access to. And so, there's that piece of it. We have the great talent to bring in. The second piece is that once they're here, life happens, right? People spend a long time at these companies. And so by having a remote work option, it means that if life is going to take you across the country, we don't have to lose you as an employee. We can make that work for you. So it's helped us in that sense of holding on to these really valuable employees and just making it work for them. And then I think the third element of it is really being able to solve for our customers, right? By having different time zones, by having people within our employee base who can also emulate what our customer base looks like and the backgrounds that they come from, the locations they live in, it also allows us to better serve them. So it's really come up in a lot of different ways over the years, but I stand by that statement. I think it's been business critical for us.
I love that. Yeah, you're right. There's so many strategic advantages to building it this way. I know a lot of people who are listening to this already know that, but it's really cool to hear it from like a larger company who's making that transition and didn't start, natively as a distributed company. So I'd love to ask, just again, because things are still pretty fresh within the last year, what were maybe some of the hesitations or reluctance, if any, that you came up against, either internally or externally? Like, what were some of the maybe the fears or things that you needed to overcome as you thought about doing this at a larger scale and having distributed teams?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I've always been transparent about was that I've been very lucky that our leadership was already bought in, right? They already believed in remote work. We've had remote workers for a small number of them for over 10 years. And so I had that advantage coming in. But I think inevitably, even if we think about, somebody who's thinking about going remote themselves, there are going to be those concerns of, will I be lonely? Will I be able to grow my career? Will I be able to collaborate as effectively? And similarly, for a manager that might have their first employee going remote, that can be a scary thing, right? It changes the way that you might manage. It changes the way you might communicate or collaborate. And I think the great thing about our managers is they all want to do a really great job, but it's a new environment, right? They don't know how. And so a lot of times it's getting around that fear of, how will I keep the same relationship and the same sort of trust that we built once that remote relationship is involved? And that's oftentimes, I think, what anyone who's envisioning the remote work option is going to run into. And thankfully, there's ways to solve for that. There's ways to coach on that. But as a company, the nice thing is that we had that structure already built in, which was certainly a benefit to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely easier than just pulling something out of a hat, right? And saying this is a completely new thing and it's been tested in some way already.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So actually, I guess on that note, because I've followed HubSpot for a long time, I think I remember using the platform early days, like '09 or 10, and since then have really kind of kept along this amazing journey that the company has been on. And consistently, HubSpot is named like the best place to work, right? So best place award. And I guess I'm wondering, asking you, how do some of those best place characteristics now extend to a growing remote team? Like, how are you preserving and kind of amplifying that to folks who aren't co-located and aren't in the same place?
Certainly. And I'm glad you asked that. I think, even just that phrasing of best place to work, I think we think about culture sometimes and it often feels like the structure, the environment, right? The coffee we provide, the beer we provide, all of these things that you hear about in tech companies. But I think one thing that I love about HubSpot is that culture, and the reason it's the best place to work is because it extends beyond the walls. As somebody who's in my home 4 days a week, in the office 1 day a week, what I love working about HubSpot is, the coffee's great, but what I really love is that I can go and chat with our CPO, Katie Burke, with no questions asked. I have that access to her. I have that trust from her. I can collaborate, I can experiment, I can do all of these things safely. I have that ability to also challenge myself personally. I can learn about different groups of people through our employee resource groups, and all of that extends no matter where you're sitting. And I think that because they've done that so well, that's what's allowed them to be a best place to work, because you don't have to physically be sitting there to experience all of those things. They've thought about how to really infuse that in the fabric so that everybody can feel it, even if you're not there.
And I think that, again, that goes back to show that I think some of the ideals and cultural values that the company's been built on stand the test of time. Like, they transcend whether you're co-located or whether you have a distributed team. And if it can't, maybe that's a good reason for reevaluating kind of what you built your company on, right? Like, it's if you do bristle up against some of these changes, like, what's going on there? Maybe there should be some reevaluation of what we really value.
Yeah, I think culture just really needs to be decoupled from location. And I think when HubSpot talks about its culture, we talk about the culture code, we talk about heart, which are all the values that we stand for. And I think none of that has to do with the facilities. I think that's what's really allowed us to sort of take that step forward.
Amazing. So I know you alluded to it in one of your earlier answers, just about this idea of avoiding isolation, avoiding loneliness, and how really there is, and we've talked with other guests on the show too, just about there's this growing kind of dark side of people feeling more isolated as they're embracing remote work. So what are some of the ways that you guys are tackling that? And, what can people learn from the experience that you've had so far?
Yeah. So a big thing for us has been this idea that remote inclusion is everyone's job, right? I think a lot of times the idea of solving for that isolation falls on the remote employee, it falls on their manager. But I think what really makes it work and makes it effective is if all of your colleagues and all of the teams are thinking about, well, I'd love to have lunch with that remote employee, so we'll just book a conference room, right? We'll do it over Zoom. If we're thinking about in any event, in any meeting that we have, how are we enabling the remote workers to not just watch us, but to engage in the meeting? And so I think it really takes that sort of group and team effort to say that we're always going to be thinking remote first. We're always going to be thinking about, how can we also just check in with our remote folks? They often, I think what will happen is only have people reach out to them for a work question. And so you miss that. How was your weekend, right? Just wanted to say hi. Here's a funny story. And so I think just being really thoughtful about those things and making sure that you're not forgetting the human on the other side of the laptop is really important. And thankfully, HubSpot hires the type of people that are really empathetic to those experiences. And so that's been really helpful to us. But I also think there's an element of creating the channels for that kind of engagement. So we've spun up, we do a weekly Zoom water cooler where all of our remote employees, they jump on a Zoom just like we're on now, and they'll jump in and we talk about anything but work. There's a lot of dogs in the background, but it's just a fun time to sort of get to know each other and talk to people as you might if you were, in the lunchroom or in the hallway, something like that. We also have ways for folks to connect individually. So we have monthly mixer groups. We have a buddy program, a mentor program. We've done coffee chats. We've done trivia nights. There's tons of ways that I think we've just encouraged folks to connect with each other virtually. And at the end of the day, I think the big thing is just remembering that, if you're willing to be sort of vulnerable and maybe even silly and add a Zoom to something that you might do in person, chances are it might be a little weird, right? We did remote yoga once. It was a little weird, but I think the reality is if you're willing to do that with your remote employees, you create some of that trust that will build up some of that camaraderie and help them to feel really valued too.
I love this. So this is something I really want to underscore because a lot of times people have expressed, hey, we love how efficient our remote team is, but everything is so transactional from like a language perspective. So you just gave people like dozens of ways to try to break out of that and then have some fun and have some kind of natural human-to-human contact. I got to ask you though, how did the yoga go? Like, what did that look like? And why is this not a thing everywhere? I love it.
Well, it's one of those things that being not great at yoga, I wish that I had done a little more studying. I wish I had thought about camera angles. But it was really fun. We've got a great remote employee who is also a yoga teacher, and he sort of led our efforts. There were dogs and cats walking over the mats. But honestly, we all had a really good laugh from it. It was a really fun time. And it's just sort of inspired other efforts. Our crochet club is remote friendly, and I sit there crocheting on Zoom. And so there's just a lot of fun ways that I think, again, if you don't let that become a barrier, then there's a lot of ways you can engage with people.
I love that. Yeah. So that's really, really, really important for people to find out or about themselves too, is that not every hour of your day should be blocked for just work stuff. Like it's okay to have a little bit of fun. It's okay to get to know your teammates. And I love that. It's a really creative way to solve the problem.
That's exactly right.
So I wanted to drill down into maybe some more of the tactical side of things, because I know, so every employee who is onboarded with HubSpot basically gets like an IT kit, and there's like this whole protocol. So could you walk us through that a little bit? Because I think you guys have really, stumbled upon something and done that really well.
Yeah, so one thing we say to our remote employees is that, your whole work experience is going to happen through your laptop, right? So we care a lot about from the time you become a remote employee, if you start as a remote employee, we want to make sure that you have the system set up to be able to engage with everyone, to be able to communicate with everyone. And so we do provide an IT setup for all of our remote employees, but we also have this really incredible IT and collaboration team that doesn't just give them these supplies, but make sure that they know, what's the Zoom etiquette here at HubSpot, right? Do we use our cameras or not? Do we go on mute or not? How are the best ways to use gallery mode so you can see everybody's faces? And so we think about not just stopping at the equipment piece, but making sure that do you know how to truly engage with your employees and your colleagues via that technology? And if there's an issue, who are you going to contact, right? If all of a sudden your laptop, you spill water on it and you can't communicate with anyone, that's the equivalent of your office just sort of burning down, right? All of a sudden you can't work. What do? We want them to know the team that's going to help them. We want them to know that they're there 24/7. And we want them to know all the different ways that they could communicate with them in those moments. So we think a lot about the technology side because we know that it's so integral to the experience. And we want to make sure that they understand that similar to the way we do care about our facilities, we care about theirs too.
I love that. I know it's something personally that I want to do better with our team is just having a more definitive onboarding plan, because sometimes if you don't say what seems to be obvious, then people are uncomfortable about asking about it, right? So it's just getting it out there is important.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we try to encourage folks. We have a whole document built on those types of silly questions that can come up. And it was built off of this premise that, when I started in the role, I asked a bunch of remote employees, what caused you anxiety in the first couple of weeks? And what I found, to my surprise, was that it was often little things like, I wanted to walk my dog midday, but I wasn't sure if I had to ask someone if I could be offline for an hour, right? And of course the answer is no, you don't have to ask anyone. But what they wanted was all of those sort of expectations to be laid in with their manager and make sure that they were both on the same page. So now during the first few weeks, what we encourage is for employees and their managers to go through this document of, almost very basic questions, but just to establish, how often will we communicate and through what channels, and how will I know when you're stressed? What will that look like? And so we walk through all of those types of logistics as well. And I think it's so important in setting up a successful experience down the road.
And I don't know what your experience has been, but do you find that the folks that are working remotely feel like maybe they have a little bit more to prove sometimes, or they feel like they need to overcompensate to show that they're working? Like, has that been like a default emotion that you need to battle against?
I think so. I think that just in our culture today, there is this need to prove, especially because remote work can often feel like a benefit. I think there is this need to prove that, yes, I'm at my computer, and yes, I'm producing the results. My Slack dot is green all the time. And I think it's so funny because in comparison, in an office environment, especially at Hubspot, if you want to work out midday, no one's going to ask a question. And we want that same mindset to extend to our remote employees. But I think that is something that you naturally have to battle against with remote work. It's just trusting that, we hired you to do great work. We trust you to do that great work. We need you to trust us too.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's great. So just because you mentioned you made some changes around the office as well to try to enable this interaction between co-located folks and people that are remote. What are maybe some of the more impactful technology improvements, or just, any sort of changes that you've made that you would maybe recommend for other people that are in the same boat?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm fortunate we have an incredible team. They're literally called the collaboration team. And their whole job is to help us collaborate virtually. And so they've done some really cool things. They have, a whole remote focus group of remote folks that help them to understand pain points so that they can solve for them on an ongoing basis. But in the past, to answer your questions and things that they've done, one thing we found was that there are a lot of teams that like to whiteboard and brainstorm live together. Obviously, it's really hard to do that when one person's virtual. You can always point the camera at the whiteboard. Maybe you could use Zoom whiteboarding, but there were just sort of these barriers to the remote person feeling like they could truly see and engage. And so we have smart whiteboards that allow us to really enable that whiteboarding together, which has been really essential, especially for our product teams and our marketing teams. We also have Zoom-enabled rooms. So if you walk into a conference room, that camera is there for you, so that you can easily bring somebody into Zoom, as well as all of our big meeting rooms. So if we're having a big event, our remote employees can feel like they are, engaging with that and able to see all of that. And I think that's been really helpful, just in having that sort of standard throughout the building. But they've even gotten creative. We had a remote employee who wanted to feel like they were sort of in the row of their team, to see who had their headphones on, right? Who can I ask a question to? What sound bites can I hear on the floor? And so they essentially just sort of wheeled in a laptop and set up a system so that the remote employee could do that. And I love the way that they've just gotten really creative to solve for those instances.
It's like a whole new brand of hacking. I mean, you guys are really hacking like this weird like physical and virtual divide in some pretty creative ways. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a game changer for us. I think, again, just being willing to sort of experiment and be creative. It's not always going to work, but I think that element of let's try it out, let's see what we can do, and then expand as needed has been absolutely essential.
If people are curious, is there like an Instagram feed or something that you'd recommend? Like, where can people see kind of what these setups look like? Is that published anywhere?
Yeah, so we do have a HubSpot Life Instagram, and it's often taken over by our remote employees. So you'll see some of the elements there, but that's probably the best place to see, what our employee setups are, or how our in-office employees are engaging with remote folks.
That's good. You guys should create like a Pinterest board or something, curate kind of these options. That sounds like a good
We
content
should.
piece.
That's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, I want to ask you too, just, a little bit more around the idea of like the kind of mental health, just you're really about creating boundaries, I guess is what it comes down to. How have you guys taken on the challenge of creating boundaries where work is like really attached to you, with your laptop? There's not like that concrete end to the day necessarily. How's your team kind of gone about navigating those waters?
Yeah, so what we try to do is just provide best practices and also reestablish that we don't want you to be working 12-hour days, right? That's not good for anyone. And what we encourage our employees to do is, use their good judgment. One thing I learned in this role is that it's not just that I want people to be working, 8 to 9 hours or whatever the case may be. It's that some people do like to work very late at night. That's when they do their best work. So it's not fair for me perhaps to say, I want you to shut down at 5 o'clock your time. And so I think recognizing that everybody's best work times and styles are different, but also helping them to create boundaries so that other people know what those boundaries are. So for example, we use the Google Calendar setup so that you can see when somebody is in their working hours, which means that if I have a remote employee 3 hours behind me and I'm booking a meeting at 9 a.m. my time, it just bounces back and says this is outside that employee's working hours. It takes some of the pressure off of that employee to feel like they have to say yes to that meeting, and helps me to understand that, hey, I'm going to flex a little bit so that we can meet when you're actually in business hours. Similarly, we do the same thing with Slack. We encourage employees, snooze your Slack. Right? We've got people in all different time zones. People work at all different times based on what works for them. But we do want to reinforce that just because somebody sends you a message doesn't mean you have to respond to it immediately. And again, it just helps to send that message of, I'm outside of my working hours. I will get back to you the next day. And I think those things have been really helpful to us. But it's also just helping our managers and our team to reinforce this idea of asking questions like, how's your energy this week? What's going on for you? How are you feeling? How long are you working? And getting comfortable with those kinds of conversations so that it's not just up to the remote employee. We're checking in on them and reinforcing that we want them to be healthy and energized and enjoying their work life as much as their home life.
I love that. It's really the same tools that create the problem can also be the solution. It's kind of what I'm hearing you say. It's like
exactly right.
explore the features, right? I think my Slack notifications are almost always muted. Otherwise, I'm like a squirrel and I just can't get anything done. But a major feature I've been using recently too has just been like Slack reminders to just remind me about this in 3 hours or whatever.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's just about sort of figuring out your own communication style and what works for you.
Awesome. That's great. It creates this culture of kind of mutual respect and people, respecting the boundaries that other people have set while also putting up their own, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me ask you this just about, because I know a lot of folks more kind of on the executive side or maybe founders that I talk to, they're trying to think about things like career path and like what is viable for somebody who is working remotely, especially when there's like this, maybe I don't want to call it like a gap, but there is a difference between co-located and remote, and you're trying to bridge that gap as much as possible. So do you guys, to the degree that you can speak to it too, like, is there a limit on kind of who is able to work remotely? Is that limited to folks who are independent contributors versus managers, or how do you view that kind of path forward?
Yeah, so at Hubspot, we're lucky. We have remote employees all the way up to the VP level. We've got directors, we've got managers, individual contributors, of course, make up the majority of the population. But I think one thing that's been really great about HubSpot is because we've had remote employees for so long in the beginning, naturally those folks, sort of blaze that path for themselves. They prove themselves in the role. There was no reason why we shouldn't promote them. They had already proved that, they could collaborate virtually. They had proved themselves in working. And so I think they were really the trendsetters perhaps within HubSpot. That trust was already there. And then as we've sort of grown the company, we've hired net new directors who are remote. We've been able to hire people just to come in at those top levels. And I think one thing that's been really important in enabling that, again, is just in that inherent trust that we're going to hire the right people to do the best work. And that might mean a leadership role, that might mean an individual contributor role, but we don't let that get in the way. Certainly there will always be roles where there's, a physical presence required. You have to be in the office to perhaps help in the mailroom, things like that. But a question we always challenge is, why can't it be done virtually, right? What aspect of this role cannot be done virtually? And I think there's very few roles where that is the case. And so that's been a really nice thing at HubSpot, is that we have that kind of, like I mentioned, just inherent trust and ability to, I think, sort of test the waters on remote leadership. And it's been really successful for us. We're really proud to have folks in leadership who are also remote.
Yeah. What an excellent way to show that, there's a path forward, right? That there's not second-class citizens and first-class citizens, and that this is open. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Fantastic.
really important, like, not to create a career ceiling for remote folks, right? Because that's certainly not going to help in your efforts. So I think that you're exactly spot on with that.
That's awesome. So I do know, just, based on kind of your background and the work that you've been doing, that you really are, I think, in my opinion, on the forefront of thinking through like mental health and how that intersects with remote. And we alluded to it already a little bit with the isolation and how you're overcoming that. But either positive or negative, because I think remote work is very much a neutral force in many senses, but how are you seeing this either, challenge people's mental health, empower them from that perspective? Like what are some of the interactions, I guess, that you're seeing on that whole front of mental health and remote work in general?
Yeah. So to start on the more negative side, I guess, I think one thing that can really happen with remote work is, I call it the social media effect of remote work, right? Where it seems like when you're the only person in your home doing the job, and you see your team on Slack and all you hear is, this person crushed it, just got another win, something like this, right? That's what you see in the emails. That's what you see on the wiki. It can feel similar to how social media can feel, that everybody but you is crushing it. And so I think in addition to that, when you're alone all day and you don't have anyone to turn to just to say, man, I'm having a bad day, can we grab a coffee? I think that can really start to pile on and impact a person. And so the ways that we've tried to solve for that is by helping teams to build that psychological safety, helping them to also share their failures. So we encourage things like a Friday failure forum, right? What's a mistake you made this week? What did you learn from it? And how can we all benefit? Reinforces that idea that everybody has bad days, but how can we learn from each other and support each other in that? And so I think that's been really helpful. Another thing we do with that is a rosebud and thorn technique, right? So once a week, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of awkward as a remote employee to say, just so everyone knows, I had a great weekend. Here's what I did. Here's what I'm looking forward to. But if you have this sort of structure to say, hey, in your time zone, let us know, what are you excited about this week? What was tough for you this week? And what's a really good thing going on for you right now? It allows us all to get to know each other personally, which can help to establish some of that psychological safety and connection. So that's been really helpful for combating that kind of social media effect. On the flip side, I think on the more positive side, for a lot of folks, whether it be the commute, whether it be the open office environment and the chaos that can be involved there, or just the stress of, how am I going to manage daycare and the dog walking and also getting in and out of work? By taking some of those elements out of the equation and allowing someone to just work where they work best and when they work best, that can have a huge impact, not just on their mental health, but also on their physical health, right? If you're not surrounded by the snacks in the office, you can make your own meals, if you can go to the gym that's close to your home, all those things I think can also be really beneficial. So I think, as you mentioned, it's neutral, but it depends on how you really enable that remote work to be more of a positive than a negative.
I love that. I love that. And let me ask you, just on a personal level, I guess, what is your average day, if there's such a thing? What does your average day look like? What do you enjoy most about kind of having that flexible work arrangement?
Yeah, so for me, I tend to work best in the morning. So I'll often book off my mornings to just get some work done. I'll put my music on, I'll snooze my Slack, and just get project work done. I have a lot of one-to-one meetings. It's a lot of coaching, a lot of training. So I tend to have those in the afternoon. but I do try to break up my day. So I have my coworker, Remy, my black lab. I go for a walk midday. He keeps me motivated to actually leave the house, which I think is really important.
That's good.
I do try to, get out to the gym, go do something to interact with other people. But I'm lucky that I'm on Zoom with people all day. I feel like I'm talking to people all day. So that loneliness isn't as much of an issue for me. But I think one of the biggest things is that at the end of the day, there's a door to this room. And I close my laptop and I close that door and I've left my office for the day. And I think being able to separate those two spaces has been super important for me.
Yeah, that's really good. And that even goes back to the boundaries, just having a physical token or something to cue that you're done, right? It's really important.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same as like if everybody's getting up because traffic's going to get crazy and leaving the office, it's that same kind of signal that the workday is done. I've decided that I'm going to close the door and now I'm going to focus on the rest of my life. That's been really helpful.
Man, I love that. So I love that you're sitting in a position where you're seeing this whole program evolve and start to go to scale. And I guess I don't know how many employees are working remotely now for HubSpot, but the point is just taking off in this direction, right? You're really building this program. So I'd love to ask just a future of work in general, not even necessarily at HubSpot and for HubSpotters, but just what's your take on how this all looks in the coming 10 years, 20 years, whatever the timeline is that you think is appropriate. But I'd love to just hear from you, what are some of the trends that you're seeing and what do you think the future looks like in terms of remote work or any type of really flexible work arrangement?
Yeah. Not surprising. I think remote work's the future. I think that more and more companies will start to focus on the results that are produced by their employees versus how long you're at work or where you're working or what you're wearing when you're working, what you look like. What they're going to care about is what did we hire you to do and how are you doing it? But I think a really key element to that is that it's not just, the numbers you produce or the sales you make, whatever the case may be. Part of making those sales, part of making those numbers is also being happy as an employee, feeling inspired by the company, feeling supported and trusted. And so I think we'll start to see this shift of not just saying, yes, you can work remote, yes, you can work those time zones, but actually saying, here's how we're going to support you in that. Here's how we're going to enable you and help you to find work-life balance. Here's how we're going to help you not feel so lonely, for example. And so it's going to be less about allowing and more about enabling and supporting. And I'm excited for that shift because I think that will also help more folks to be able to work remotely effectively.
I love that answer. That is just, that really plumbs the depths because you're right. It's this whole cultural change too. It's this whole view of what do we value about work and what goes into you as a teammate to be the best that you can be. And it's not just your certifications. It's not just your whatever it might be. Although the HubSpot certification inbound is really good to get.
They're good.
It goes beyond that. It goes beyond that and really how holistically you're looking at your life. So I love that. I hope that's what happens because that would be a huge evolution for people in general who just want to work and reconcile that work with their life in a different way.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this, just to kind of to start winding down here, because I know you've been very open with how well appointed your workspace is at home, and there's a quote that I saw on that desk that really grabbed me, and I can help you with it if it's not in front of you or not fresh, but it looked like kind of a mantra or something they might have. Start where you are.
Ooh, let's see. I've had a couple. You probably saw an older picture. So start where you are, use what you have.
And do what you can. Yeah, that really stood out to me. So where did that come from? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I think, oftentimes this role can feel very big, right? It's a global role. There's a lot to do. The job will never be done. And so it can be very easy for me, again, to sit down at this desk alone and feel like, oh my God, I have to take on the whole remote work world. And so it's something that I just started to put onto that letterboard was, let's focus on today. What's in front of you? What can you do between 9 to 5 today that you can actually accomplish and feel proud of at the end of the day? And sort of taking that baby step approach versus constantly thinking about, what am I trying to do in the year ahead? I think we can get really overwhelmed by that. And so I try to just sort of piecemeal it out and try to be proud of the work I've done at the end of the day.
I love that. And I think it's a great mantra, not just for anybody who wants to kind of do anything of significance in their life, but also for people that are trying to go to a remote model, right? It's just like, start where you are. Like if you have some people who are remote already, maybe create some definition there, use what you have, the resources you have, and then do what you can. It's like, it actually translates really well to folks that want to make this transition, I think.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you can't do it all at once. And I think as long as the value is always there, as long as you're always inspired to make a positive change for your employees, if that's what's going to lead you, you're only going to go in the right direction. You might make some mistakes along the way, and that's okay. But that's also the value of not doing it all at once. You're going to learn in increments and build on that.
Love it. So if you were to do this all again, you were to start over and let's just think about it personally, just as one who is working remotely, what are some things that you might have done earlier? What are some changes that you might have made from the beginning that you now can see in retrospect?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that I think about with this role is because it can be so wide ranging, there's so many people that you're talking to all the time. I think what I would have been a little bit more thoughtful about from the beginning was, before I learned that lesson from the letterboard, sort of writing out that roadmap and thinking about, what are the really big things that I need to make sure I address this year? What are the biggest pain points to focus on? And making sure that that roadmap is always at the heart. I think one thing that's amazing about remote work is that it can be just inherently personal. And so oftentimes, you'll have one employee who's got a challenge and you want to throw your whole day away to solve just for that challenge. And I think that's something that makes HubSpot a great place to work. That's something I love about my job. But I think you also have to be able to take that step back and focus on that roadmap. So I kind of built it as I went. I tried to focus on the pain and develop from there, but probably could have done a better job about making sure I had a very clear roadmap from the beginning and let that guide my path when things got really crazy.
I love it. Meaghan Williams, you are doing some really exciting things at HubSpot. I'm really excited to see just how the program expands and how you continue to scale. Where can people find you? Where can people reach out and say hi to Remy, your co-pilot there?
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's taking a nap right now, but
Okay. Good for him.
Yeah, must be nice. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about remote at HubSpot, you can go to hubspot.com/careers/remote. You'll learn more about what it's like to work remotely at HubSpot, as well as our open roles if you're interested to work with us.
Fantastic. Meaghan, thanks so much for taking the time, and we're excited to follow along the story as it unfolds.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
You bet.